the basics of text, of the study of text, is that each text is a response to a problem, right? So each text revolves around the problem. So scientific report must have a problem, right? We cannot see any problem being identified in the text. There's no specific problem identified. There is no specific information there about the method that was used to collect data, to analyze data. There's no framework, there's no dialogue there, right? Remember the dialogue? From which perspective? What is the perspective taken on the problem? None of that is there. So you need to be careful when you read sometimes what the linguists say a particular text is about. If you now can apply your daily knowledge, right, about the world, what genre do you think that text belongs to? That text about the whales, what do you, we have now established it is not a scientific report. But what do you think? What type of genre does it remind you of? You called it description, right? So the description is a good start. What do we call that kind of descriptive text? What do we call this kind of descriptive text? You may not remember. Encyclopedic entry, right? When you go, I hope I got that spelling right. When you go to Wikipedia, I don't know how they spell Wikipedia like this, so Wikipedia, right? When you go to Wikipedia, that's what you want. You type whales and they will say to you, they have no legs, they have, whatever they said in that text. What did they say they have? Flippers, they swim, they have two types of whales, right? That's a descriptive information, which means it's more like an encyclopedic entry, just the basics about the animal, right? It's not a report, it's not a scientific report, it's just encyclopedic entry. I'm just talking to someone else, I didn't hear it. Anyway, can everybody see this text about lemons? Can you see the text about lemons? Oh, fantastic. So how do we know that it is a science report? Well, first of all, can you see the link? I'll put it in the chat just in case you want to see it yourself. It's got a link. When you see the link, it says neuroscience news, right? Before it actually takes us to the article on sour foods, it actually says neuroscience news. Million articles all about neuroscience. Right. And advertisements, right? So there. And it also so I clicked on this article about the lemons. So Neuroscience News is the website that reports on scientific research, right? So it's not necessarily a scientific report written by a scientist, but it's written by a journalist who reports on science findings. So in some sense, it is a science report, but it's a journalistic science report. Journalistic science report. So this particular report is about research which was published and probably has many pages of complicated text. And this website has a lot of journalistic science reports. And this means this is a genre that is used nowadays to report science findings to broader audience. So someone like you and me is not likely to understand much from a neuroscience study, right, with a real scientific report, because there will be terminology which is complex. They will have what else they can have? They can have numbers and statistics that maybe we don't have a head for. So this is like a simplified, for people like us, simplified science report, written by a journalist who probably is a scientist and whose job is to communicate science findings to broader audience. So it's called journalistic science report. And it's it's on a particular website which has different topics. You can go to anywhere. And let's analyze it now. Okay, we're gonna have fun analyzing it. So we're thinking of our generic structure: the focus, the disturbance, the dialogue, and so on. Development, resolution. It has a title. It's a nice, funny title. When life gives you lemons, you take more risks, right? So it summarizes the study in that little slogan or proverb or something like that, right? It's funny. It attracts your attention. So we might read. So notice the first difference with the journalistic report. So when we had a paper that we analyzed in early on, right? So in the first hour of our class, we analyzed an abstract, and it had this long abstract, right? So it was written for scholars. This one is written as a scientific report, but written for people like you and me. So look at this. The abstract here really is 2 sentences. Now, you may or may not guess which bits were removed from it. But if you look at the abstract, does it have a focus? Does it have the problem? Does it have a dialogue? It's only 2 sentences, so it's likely to actually not have all these elements, but rather it squashed all these elements into 2 sentences. And in my view, I don't know if you read it, researchers report exposure to sour foods can increase our desire to take a fewer risks. Risk-averse people. So researchers report exposure to sour food, so the more sour food you eat, may increase our desire to take a fewer risks, less risks. Risk-averse people, such as those with anxiety disorders, they don't like taking risks, could benefit from eating sour foods to help them boost risk-taking behavior, such as talking to new people. So basically they are saying the finding is, and we report here, but eating sour foods might be good for anxious people. And that bit is what? It's almost like a resolution, right? I would think that the whole, now you don't have to guess it, okay? Because it is a little bit difficult, and it's also difficult for me as well. But I think what they did here in the summary, they simply, I took the bit from the resolution. So from the abstract, they took the resolution, which is the finding, and they placed it here. But they did another thing. They did another thing. We may say that this is the resolution and this is the moral, but I also find it very interesting that even though they have a title here, they begin the article with this text right at the start, which is anyone needing a little excitement in their lives could do worse than suck a lemon. Surprising new research at the University of Sussex suggests. It's almost like another summary, right? It's almost like a moral, right? If you want some more excitement in your life, researchers from the University of Sussex say it's best for you to suck on lemon. It's almost like a moral. So I think that it's very interesting because this is a scientific report written for an average person. It, instead of having an abstract which is long, it wiped out all the things about the methods of research, all the things, and the summary contains only the resolution stage. What are the findings? We're not analyzing words here this very second. We will a little bit later on. Notice that they start researchers report, right? They don't say sucking on lemon is really good thing for you because nobody cares. We just want to know, but it's legitimate. So they're legitimizing it by saying it's the researchers that report. Of course, they legitimize it further. They say source. Where did they get that from, right? And then look at this. Even if it is what I call it, a moral of a story, right? As you will read the text today, you will notice there is no moral. The text doesn't finish with the moral, but the moral was taken from the end of the text and was put right at the start. It's the best if you're anxious, it is the best to suck on lemon or eat sour foods, right? So people with anxiety might help themselves by eating a bit more of sour foods. So the structure of a moral is usually something like it's best to do this. It's best when winter, it's always best to prepare for hard times, right? It's always best to prepare for hard times. It's always best not to talk while you eat. It's always best to respect your friends, right? So these are the morals from different proverbs, from different parables, from different stories. It's always best. It's always best. So anyone needing a little excitement in their life, it might be best that they suck on a lemon. Great. So notice we have a title. We do have an abstract, but they don't call it abstract because average person is not familiar with the concept of an abstract. So what they did, they summarized the finding of a study. They legitimized it by saying researchers, so it makes it a science report, but it is actually a journalistic science report. They legitimized it with the source. They put the moral right at the start, right? So it's not just the finding here, but the so what. Okay, so we have a finding in the summary, but what does this mean to me as a person? I don't care. I don't care what's their finding, which is the summary is all right. I'm happy that it's there. But as a person, I don't really care about the finding. So it's very important that journalists, when they write a journalistic science report, that they put right at the front what's the message of the article, right? Not just the finding, but the lesson, the message of the article. And the message is, it's funny. It's funny, but it could be right. It appears to be right. If you're anxious, eat sour food, might help you, right? So it's a very nice move. So we will see that this particular journalistic report is written extremely well, and it can teach us a lot about how to write articles for our website. Maybe articles which report our findings, but not writing them in a complicated way that everybody just gets tired reading them. So if you want to write a complicated paper, you send it to a professional journal. But on your personal website, if you want to report your findings or your thoughts, it's a lovely way in which this particular author appropriates text structure to communicate scientific findings in a easy way. So we have a title, we do have an abstract, but from the abstract, he only included the findings. His written source, University of Sussex, maybe that's the genre of these journalistic scientific reports. He could have put that University of Sussex here, researchers from the University of Sussex report. He could have put it there, right in the summary. Maybe he didn't want to. It would have made the summary longer. And remember, it's written for your uncle, for your daughter, for you. So the shorter, the better, right? Because this is written for an average person. So the abstract here turned into a summary, which included only the findings, which is the resolution stage of the text. Not the development, which talks about the study design, but the resolution, because everybody wants to know, so what happened, right? And then people want the moral. So what's in it for me? And usually the moral is at the end of a story, but people don't have time. So what this particular author did, they put the moral right here in bold so that people wouldn't miss it, right? So anyone needing a little excitement in their lives could do worse than suck a lemon, surprisingly research at the University of Sussex suggests, right? So that's lovely. All right, so now it's the focus, right? What's the focus here? Or maybe before you find the focus, where's the problem here? Scientists at the Sussex Computer Human Interaction Lab say they have found for the first time empirical evidence that sour tastes lead to more risk-taking behavior in a paper published in Scientific Reports today. Scientific Reports is a Category 1 journal, and it's part of the journal called Nature. So it's really important, like the journal to publish in if you are a famous scientist. So it's really like a very legitimate study. And then look at that. So we have scientists. So when we're looking at focus, we're looking at the way the focus would be introduced. So we have scientists at the Sussex Computer Human Interaction Lab, right? So it gives us legitimation of a study. So they're not just scientists from an island of happy lives. It's actually a legitimate school or university. They call it themselves a laboratory, right? And it's from University of Sussex, so it's a kind of prestigious organization. So he put all of these credentials right at the front. So he focused us first on the credentials. They're not just scientists from the happy island, but scientists from a credible institution, right? So the focus is really the scientists from a credible institution and the findings, right? So I'm not going to tell you what the problem is, but I'm showing you how beautifully this article was written. So you can look at the beginnings of each sentence to know, and this will help you also identify where is the dialogue, where is development, and so on. Okay, so let's look at that. And meanwhile, I hope you will find the problem here. So scientists, so we're focusing on legitimation, right? Legitimation of a report, right? It comes from a credible university or credible institution. And look at this, beautiful. The researchers recommend, right? It didn't start. Behavior such as leaving the house or talking to a stranger can be assisted when you take or eat or expose yourself to lemon, the researchers recommend. They could do it like this, but Jesus, what a mental gymnastics, right? Mind you, because I come from Europe, in Europe, that's how we often write. We start with something like this. And maybe in an academic paper, that could have been useful. But in a paper, in a journalistic scientific report, which is for broader audience, you really don't want to start with something as complicated as this. You really want to say where the information comes from. The researchers recommend. They also recommend. And look at this. This person said this. And this person said that. And they also said that. And look what happens next. The study involved, so what happened? It's the design of a study. The study involved 168 participants from the UK and Vietnam. Oh, from the Vietnam. Look at that. So it's the design of a study. The participants were asked to do a particular thing. And here's some more about the design. And participants could do this or that. And here we have a finding. On average, participants who drank citric acid, this is what happened. The study also found this. The researchers say their experiments indicate. So it's the resolution. This is more text about the resolution, more text about the resolution. And it's kind of like a moral or, or more about the resolution, just comments about the resolution. Or we could think it's a moral, although the one at the top also is the moral, which is it could be that by taking that first bite of something sour, we are already exhibiting, right? So that's not the moral. This is still about the resolution, really. All of this is text about the resolution. So I'm a little bit hurrying, but that's okay, because I wanted you to see how I look at texts through the framework of my model. So what I see here, right? Let me summarize again. The title, instead of abstract, we see the findings here, legitimized by the source, by identifying the source, what type of researchers, what institution they come from. Then we have the moral. So instead of having the moral at the end, the author put it right at the front of the report for people to instantly get interested in it. And look at this, needing a little excitement. They didn't start with the lemon. They said, if you are like this, if you need a little excitement, suck some lemon, right? So basically, because this is to interest the audience, the moral begins with the audience, because it's the audience that matters. Hey, you, do you need some excitement in life? Hey, this is the finding for you. right? So notice how that structure in English, where we say that the beginning matters the most because it focuses the sentence or focuses the paragraph, right? It's so important. And you can see here, the moral here, in the moral, we can find first what? The illocutor, the addressee, the audience, the people who will read this paper. Hey, you, if you need a little excitement in your life, right? That's how the moral starts. It's best if you suck some lemon. Oh, really? Right, so it's lovely. And then I look, okay, so I will be looking for, I look, okay, so I look at the focus. So the focus is a legitimate institution. And I'm trying to find the problem. Then I'm looking at this, recommend. You'd think it is findings, but it's not. But it doesn't matter. We will talk about it later. And then this person talks about, so first it's as a group they recommend, here as individual scientists they recommend, individual scientists recommends, and then we have quotes, and here we have the study design. So it's interesting. That's how I read, and I go, oh, really? Right. So we now know the focus. The focus is the legitimate institution, right? They focused us in the first sentence on the legitimate institution or on the legitimacy of the institution that reports its findings, right? On the legitimacy of the institution. That's why they have all these credentials identified. Otherwise, they could just say scientists from the UK. But it's not from the UK, it's from number one institution, research institution, right? So that's why it's there. But where's the problem here? Clearly, it will be somewhere here because here we have recommend, which is this is a dialogue on the finding, right? It's a dialogue on the problem. It's a dialogue on the because it is a science report. They are reporting on the finding. So the dialogue here will use words like recommend or advise or something, and then we would have more precise findings here. The researchers indicate that say that the experiments indicate. So that's a finding. Okay, so here they talk about the research. So this is more like a dialogue about the problem or the finding that is going to be reported on. So the researchers at Sussex Computer, blah, blah, blah. So this is legitimation. So that's a focus. We're looking at the legitimate science institution. And now what's the problem? The problem here is that they've done empirical research on the relationship between sour foods and risk-taking behavior, right? So basically, the problem here is the relationship between sour tasting foods and the behavior. That was the problem that these people looked at, right? So we have the focus and the problem in one sentence, right? So that's lovely. And now we have a bit of an introduction to the findings, a bit of an introduction to introduce us why it is a relevant subject to investigate. Well, these people talk that risk-averse people, such as those suffering from anxiety disorders, could benefit from sour enriched foods. They also say, so these are the comments about the findings, right, on that relationship between sour foods and taking behavior. So these are some comments. So they also recommend this. This person, Dr. Chi Tan V, from this particular institution, made his own views on the findings, right? So this is a dialogue. This is how the dialogue on the findings, not so much on the problem, but on the findings, because it's a science report, right? So science reports in the dialogue will have they can comment also on the problem itself, or maybe on the finding, because it is a report on something that has already been done. So it could, the researchers could have been talking about the problem, why is it important? Here they talked more about the finding, why it is important. So we've got a few people talking, we have the quotes included. And now we're learning about the development. So what happened? Well, they had, look at this, how they started. The study involved so many participants, right? So that it's lovely. We have a lovely discursive now move. We stopped with what the people think about the findings. Now about the study itself. It involved this many participants. This is how the study followed, right? So you can read it for yourselves at home, this particular article. I'm sure in the chat I posted to you the link. And look at this. Here, the study doesn't begin with the word the study found, although they could. But you know this is a finding, because look at the next paragraph. The study also found, right? So instead of saying in each paragraph, the study found, the study also found, this was the structure that they used in the abstract, in the linguistic abstract that we analyzed in the first hour. Well, here they didn't report the findings saying in the study found, the study also found. They just tried to use some sort of synonyms or ways in which they could say the study found, but in a more sort of, by making use of new or different words. So on average, participants who drank citric acid pumped the balloons at a significantly higher frequency than with any other taste. I don't know, clearly some relationship is explicated here that the methodology of the paper explained as important. The study also found this, beautiful, whatever it was that they found. You see, I'm as a text when I focus on text analysis, I'm just not examining with you all the words. I'm just looking how the text was shifting from one stage to the next and which phrases were indicative of a shift. And that's very important because it helps clarity. So when you yourself in your abstract and in your text, when you write your own text, be mindful of these shifts, because it's very easy to make the text difficult to read because we get so involved in our own text and we start using our own ways of reporting, and we are culturally influenced because not in every language this particular structure may work. So we lose the focus, and we may not actually use these clear indicators of a shift of the paper. First, we reported on how the study was designed, right? So after we finished with the scientists who were describing their views of the finding, because it's a study, it's a report on the findings. So once we finished the dialogue, where we indicated what these people think about the finding, Then we actually moved to the development, and and clearly indicated now from the quote, we now said the study involved so many participants and they were from these many countries, and we wanted to diversify between, we wanted to have different participants from different cultures, because some cultures might be using more sour foods, some less. So we're looking at a way to avoid cultural bias, so that we don't find out that, to avoid cultural bias, you diversify your study participants. And that's why they did. UK, less sour. Vietnam, likes sour. So we now diversify to see whether there is whether our finding will be statistically valid. So there's more about the study, more about the study, more about the study, and now the findings on average. This is what we learned. And we also found this. And the researchers say this. So this is more about the finding. And this is what Dr. Veet said about the finding, right? A lot of things. And that's the end of the article. And the moral of the story is, if you need a little excitement in your life, get a lemon. So that's a nicely constructed scientific report. And you can see but it's very different than the article about the whales. The article about the whales, where the teacher claimed it was a science report, it was no report. It was just a description, as some of you wrote. It's just the most basic description of what a whale is. And I think that kind of a description you find in encyclopedia, right? Whale, well, it's not a fish, it's a mammal. It feeds, that it gives birth through the birth canal, and then it actually it feeds its children with milk, just like other mammals do. So it's a mammal, and so on and so on. So you can do that. So it's a scientific. So it's not a scientific report. It's it's a description from it's an encyclopedic, what I call encyclopedic entry. Whereas a science report is more interesting. It's got like well, the other one didn't have a title either. You know, that whale thing, it didn't have a title. I think if we were to give a title to the whale's story, we would say, "What is a whale?" Right? And that's not a sexy title, right? I just don't want to shift the screens now, so I will not go back to the whales text. But whales are this, whales live there, whales have fins, whales breathe like this, right? It's all like, what is a whale? I'm sure there are games like that on television. So the only title we could give to that particular whales text, or maybe I will shift between texts just to remind you. Right, so if we were to give a title here, we would say, what is a whale? But what would be the moral of that story? Like the moral? Now you know? Right, it's a very dry, obviously there is a structure to it also that follows my generic model, but I'm just not going into it because we don't have 16 hours or something, or 16 weeks. So I'm just not going to it. I just use this particular text for you to see that sometimes when we read or follow pedagogic, or not pedagogic, like literacy texts or literacy textbooks, that are for teachers. Sometimes they are written with the framework from 50 years ago or 60 years ago, and this is one. And they're not very critical of themselves. So you can see that there's a clear difference between a text like "What is a whale?" Why should anyone read it? I mean, if you want to, where would you, if we're talking about illocutionary force of a text, where would you publish a text like this? Whales are sea mammals and are warm-blooded. They belong to this particular order, and they can be divided into two groups. Well, they didn't even say it. Did they say they're mammals? I'm not even sure. I can't remember. Did they say they are mammals, and the little ones can suck on milk? I mean, that's the most important thing, because whales used to walk on land so many millions years ago, and then they went back to the sea. So they were actually, oh yeah, it says it's mammals. Right. Yeah. So where would you post it? Would you post it on your website? Someone would sit in front of it on your particular website and wonder, why the heck am I reading this? So you could have it if you wanted to talk about, so you would think about it. But anyway, it's not clear, right? It's literally not clear where the heck would you post a text like this. So why is this text written? If the children were taught this as a scientific report, I would ask also the teacher, who was the audience, right? Every text has an audience. Every text is written for someone. The first feature of a text is not written for no one. It's written either for you or for someone else. Who? So it's very neutral. It's not reporting for anybody. It's literally a encyclopedic entry, and it feels very different. Here, you have no reason to read it. It is like you just, it's like you read it and you go, okay, they're warm-blooded. What's next? They have teeth or not? What's next? You just don't know why you read it, and after you've read it, you don't remember. Whereas once you've read that other text about the lemon, and I didn't read every line for you and with you because there was no need, each of you knows exactly for whom it was written, and each of you knows what's the finding of it. You can remember it. You can remember its point. It's so easy. You can remember the point of the text. The point of the text was to say that a legitimate science institution learned that eating sour foods is not too bad. It actually could be good for you. Right. So whereas with the with the whale text, it's really like you don't know for whom it was written. So it could be just part of encyclopedia, but not necessarily a scientific report having a finding. There's no finding because there was no question. There could have been a question like, what mammals live in our oceans in Australia, right? What mammals live in our oceans in Australia? If this was a sort of like a website or a project that students would examine, then part of it could be the whales. But then you would have a title. What would be the summary? The summary would be on this website you learn about the plenty of mammals that live in the oceans of Australia. Come here and whatever. And what's the moral? Anyone, I don't know what's the moral. I can't work it out now. But basically, the whale story would be part of other texts about mammals that inhabit the oceans around Australia. Well, that's interesting, right? And And maybe the text itself would have changed by then, because there would be references to Australia with the whale. Like something like, not only that we have two types, but say in the Pacific bit of Australia, you are most likely to find a toothed mammal as opposed to in the in the waters of the east coast or the west coast of Australia, like some sort of like making it more meaningful, locating things around Australia, like sort of placing it somewhere. Right, so then the text would have changed a little bit. At this very moment, it's a very raw text, looking like encyclopedic entry and nothing to it. So this one is more interesting, clearly reporting on a finding, which is scientific report, and teaching us a lot about how to write in an ordered manner, but no longer just for scholarly audience, but also writing a popular scientific report for popular audience, for an average person who might come to our website and want to learn something about the science, but not necessarily get lost because they don't have the scholarly training that you require to read a proper scholarly article. And you can see, for example, if I find the paper, I'm talking a lot because I want to cover everything I wanted, and now discussions are good, but I think that all of this is relatively new and difficult, and it is difficult. Look at the scientific paper or scholarly paper. So we examined the abstract, and you can see how long is this abstract as opposed to the journalistic scientific report, which was just 2 lines, right? So this is a sophisticated abstract for sophisticated and for sophisticated professional audience. And you'll have different terminology, which is, you have this paper in your files. It's complicated, right? So proper scientific report about a study, as it has complicated terminology, different, look at that, tables with a lot of information. So when it's very different, it's a very different structure and a manner of writing than a popular science report where you have quotes from scientists and you focus on one problem only, which is the relationship between the behavior and sour taste, and you just stick to this one. You don't go around, you don't differentiate and all of that, because a scientist will do it, but for popular audience, you just say what matters. You remove the tables, you remove fine print, you remove lots of information in the table because you don't want your audience to just leave. You want them, there's 3,000 examples in this paper, right? Very difficult to read. So I wanted you to see the difference between a scholarly paper, between a badly written scientific report, which it wasn't, and I wanted you to see why it was in a scientific report. And we looked into a real scientific report, and we learned what you already said, that the scientific report not only has to have a problem, which is the key thing, and clearly indicated what problem it is, and it also has to have something about the study design and something about the findings and what's in it for the audience, right? Why should they be actually reading this thing? So and we did that because and we did that not necessarily by reading the entire paper, but by teaching you that someone like me who who is, let's call it a linguist, that I can examine the quality of the paper, not necessarily by reading every detail of it, but simply by looking at the structure of the paper. So I looked at the title, I had a look how the abstract was appropriated for the audiences. The structure of the paper was also appropriated for the audience, with the author flagging the moral or shifting the moral from the bottom of the paper where people might not find it because they may not read the whole article, and they took it and shifted it right at the front of the paper, right? So everybody can see it. So what's the best practice? Well, what's best thing to do? The best thing to do is suck a lemon if you need some excitement in your life. And then we learned that the first sentence has both the focus and the problem here, which is that the relationship between the behavior and food. And those words here were chosen on purpose to legitimize the paper, right? To legitimize the finding, right? It wasn't just made by any scientist, but from a credible research institution. And it was published in a credible journal, and it has currency today, right? So read it because it's really new. It's a hot of the press, right? So you can see how people choose words on purpose to get you interested, so that when you read it, you go, oh my God, it's a credible institution, credible journal. And not only that, I'll be the first one to know, right? Once I know it, I can go and tell other people or put it on my website or put it on my Facebook, so that my friends who have not read it may now learn about it. So we did that. We saw how things were adjusted. And then we looked at the beginnings of the words or paragraphs to see how beautifully the article shifted from one stage to the next, and what phrases were used to indicate the shift, so that the audience not long don't get lost, right? Because if we start with something for some that is the big, people get lost. So you have to say, this person said this person said that, here's the quote, now we will tell you about the design, right? We don't use the word design, but when we say the study involved so many participants, we know from now on we will be learning about the study design. So we learned here today, by comparing the Wales article with this paper, we learned what a scientific report really looks like. One is complicated, like the scholarly linguistic paper, and one is for the broader audience. And both of them, the article, the linguistic paper and this paper, are reports, whereas the Wales text was not a report, it was a description, and no problem really was identified. And as a result, it was more like an encyclopedic entry than any text that would have anything to do with being a scientific report. The conclusion of the lesson today is we need to analyze text, because sometimes people tell us this is a scientific report, but it ain't. And you need to be critical. Well, you don't have to. I am, and it helps me in my life. And I think that people in your university think that having or knowing or having a command of discourse analysis tools will help you to be critical, and it will help you to mentor other people in the future, so that they learn from you how to be critical. So I will finish here for today, and I will just open myself for a few minutes of questions. Thank you so much. Questions or comments? I want to thank the students who spoke to me and participated vocally in our class today. That's always good. It's not about getting it right or wrong. It's about enabling me to be clearer, if I may. Tomorrow we will look at, okay, for tomorrow, if you don't mind, we will be still looking at how to write a good academic paper of 500 words. But if you don't mind sketching some notes of your own paper, maybe the title and maybe what you will write about, and maybe having these phrases, you know, the focus, the problem, the dialogue. See how you can actually structure your paper for me to assess in 2 weeks. So it's due in 2 weeks. So you have plenty of time to prepare it. But if you can have some notes about how you will want to write it, what phrases you will start with and so on, it will help us all to learn from one another, but it will also help me to assist you tomorrow. And that would be helpful. So if you have no comments, I will wait another minute. You have no questions. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so if you have no comments, we might close for today, and I'll see you tomorrow in the afternoon. Okay? Thank you so much for your participation. Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, and see you tomorrow.